Good morning and good afternoon. This is Don Davis, and I'm just getting started here on Thanksgiving Day with an early morning podcast with Gary McAuslan. So before we get started today, I just wanted to remind everybody just really quickly, I've built an OKR course. If you're implementing metrics in your organization, I would highly advise that you visit my website and take a look at the OKR course that we've built. There's a nice guide that goes along with it. In addition to that, I have some helpful tips that help organizations implement metrics in their organization. So with that, in this episode of the Life Science Success Podcast, Gary McAuslan is joining me again. He's coming back as a guest. The last time that he was on, he actually was on in February of 2021. So a lot of things have changed here on the podcast. And so I'm sure we'll get, to hear a lot more about aCGT Vector and what exactly Gary's been doing with the growth of the company. So with that, let me bring on Gary here. So welcome, Gary. Great to see you again.
Yeah, you too, Don. Yeah, and happy Thanksgiving to you and all your listeners. Yeah, and thanks for taking the time this morning.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This is kind of a new experiment for me. I wanted to also show you just on the screen. You could see that it looks like Ryan Leahy is on with us as well, watching. So just to show one of our listeners on. So yeah,
excellent. Yeah, good to see everyone. Yeah.
Very good. So I guess maybe we should start with a little bit about you. I mean, I know that I know you. We've known each other for a short period of time. So I'd love to, just have you just tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I hail from Scotland. We were just chatting there about Scotland. I'm originally from Scotland, but have lived in Ireland for over 32 years actually. And I came over here for for love as well. My wife is Irish, but also for pharma. And there's a huge pharma sector in Ireland, which is 5 million population, and in this country, it's approximately $100 billion industry in this country. So we certainly have a significant play globally with the export of pharmaceuticals here. So yeah, I actually studied here, did my MBA here in Trinity College Dublin, and where some of my kids are now studying. So we've all kind of grown up here in this country. And a number of years ago, after spending about 25 years in big pharma and kind of cutting my teeth in that space in terms of CMC and developing new products, bringing them into the clinic and onto the market, I set up a consultancy practice called GMAC Pharma. And in the last sort of 12 or so years, we've helped approximately 28 companies to bring their new products into the clinic and onto the market, help some of those companies grow, rapidly grow, expand, sell, etc. So quite a bit of M&A activity involved there as well, helping companies, grow their portfolio in terms of getting products safely into the clinic and onto the market, maintain their license, etc. So that's really kind of taught me a lot about the kind of pros and cons of CMC and the importance of thinking about it early. And then it was about 3 years ago, as the last time we talked. I was in Boston and just struck by the challenge that cell therapy faces, which is one of CMC, chemistry and manufacturing controls, in terms of being able to make the product commercially viably in such a way that many patients can receive these therapies. And the thing that really struck me was there's approved therapies, it's a proven science. CAR T, for example, is an extremely well proven, safe, and effective means of treating cancer, specifically leukemia and lymphoma, and now multiple myeloma. But sadly, only 15,000 patients have had the joy of receiving that therapy. So, really, what we're trying to do, and the reason we founded aCGT Vector, um, is to resolve that problem. And essentially, by locating in hospitals what we call point of care, which is a real buzzword at the moment for the FDA and the MHRA and the EMA regulator, because they're very interested to see how we can possibly bring pharma closer to patients and really operate, right beside patients, where the starting material is the patient's own immune system. So, essentially that's something we've now done since the last time you and I were talking. We've opened our first facility here in Dublin in St James's Hospital, and we have a lot of support in there, and we're looking to license aCGT Vector in the hospital to be able to manufacture cell therapies. So it's really exciting, and probably the most exciting thing is we've had a number of excellent people join the company since January 17th, 9 a.m., and starting with Dr. Anya Adams, who came from a very large company in Europe, who are manufacturing commercially now one of the first cell therapies. And then we've got some digital folks joining as well, and financial people. Someone I worked with, my first client in GMAC Pharma, actually joined the business in June as our CFO, COO. So Garode is has really backed the company in a big way. My co-founder Ivan Coulter, we've worked together a long time, and we've really put a lot of skin into this game, and we're really working hard to make it successful with a fantastic team around us now.
Yeah, so a couple things I wanted to kind of maybe go back to with regards to aCGT Vector. So in terms of licensing it into hospitals now, will this also work for CAR T therapies? Because I mean, I know in terms of the supply chain, right, for CAR Ts is pretty long, right? I mean, you take out the patient sample, it typically gets sent off, and then the CAR T is essentially added and then sent back. So it's a very
Yeah.
long kind of supply chain right now, but obviously it would be great to get it in, into the hospital as well.
That's it, and that you've hit the nail on the head, Don. Where right now what happens is, so here in Ireland, for example, the first patients started receiving CAR T therapy just in December last year, and those patients essentially have their blood collected. It's then frozen, and they essentially send that, in some cases thousands of miles around the world, to centralized facilities where it's then thawed, and then they create the CAR and the chimeric antigen receptor T cell from the patient's own cells. They then have that fully tested, and then they freeze it again and they send it back to the hospital, and it's given to the same patient in the same hospital. So those cells have traveled around the world. They've incurred time, about 42 days of time. They've incurred freezing and thawing multiple times, testing and manipulation, etc. And there's no reason why that can't be done in the hospital, number one. But more importantly, by reducing that 42 days down, where sadly 27% of patients don't survive that 42
Wow.
days to receive their own therapy.
Mm.
And no one else can get that therapy. Like, it's a fully personalized therapy. So it's not as if it can go to another patient and they get the benefit of that. That own patient, which is a crying shame, needs to, really be receiving that therapy in much less time. So what we're trying to do by locating the same pharma standardization as you have in these facilities, and we've done this in our first hospital location, by bringing all that technology into the hospital, you can then manufacture it right beside the patient in a lot less than 42 days.
I
And
mean,
fresh.
it's amazing, especially for these patients, right? Because as I understand it, and I've not been through it or seen anybody go through it, but as far as I understand it, right, they spend time, depleting their immune system to make it so that they'll accept this therapy, and then to not survive, that initial portion is, pretty sad, and the fact that they could be on the path to potentially recovery, after the
Yeah,
treatment, with it sounds like if they had it all right there, right, still have to go through the initial phase, most likely, of depletion of the immune system, but then, still right behind it, wouldn't it be great to have the ability to implant the CAR T and off you go, right?
no, exactly. Especially, I suppose what's uncanny is when we walk into our facility, on the left hand side is the cancer ward, and on the right hand side is the pharmaceutical facility, which can now manufacture CAR T. And as you mentioned there, by the time the patient is at the point where, unfortunately, radiation therapy hasn't worked, chemotherapy hasn't worked, and now they're going to receive this potentially transformative treatment, unfortunately, their immune system is depleted.
Mm.
So, if you imagine what it would be like if a patient were to receive that therapy, let's say after radiation therapy, or eventually maybe even first line defense. So, the challenge, I suppose, is that the cost of it is prohibitive, and you would not, I suppose, today conceive that a patient could just go straight to CAR T therapy. But we definitely think by making CAR T manufacturing and cell therapy modality manufacturing more feasible by doing it in the hospital, less risky, so less risk of failure, more chance of the patient surviving, you would think that that would drive the cost in the right direction so that more patients can receive more cell therapies more quickly, basically.
Yeah.
That's
And
the goal.
I mean, do you see this being deployed around the world? I mean, do you think that hospitals would consider licensing this, potentially, let's just say in the US? Is that something that you guys are exploring?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Another thing we've been up to since the last time we were talking, Don, was we've been out and about around the world. And one of the key things we learned when we were in America recently in April, we were over in Philadelphia, which actually happens to be the same size of population as Ireland, the metropolitan area of Philadelphia. And they would have a number of cancer hospitals as a cluster. So, that was extremely exciting for us to see that, potentially you could literally land right there beside, some of the the patients that really need these therapies, and do it more economically. Recently, we've been talking to governments in Asia, and there's some very interesting things happening across there. And then there's the UK. So the UK is extremely connected in terms of the NHS. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the FDA and the MHRA and the EMA are starting to talk about point of care. I was on a conference last week, a consultation meeting with the FDA, with our industry, effectively, cell therapy, and they were asking our industry for advice in terms of how could they potentially help facilitate point of care, and to get our sort of thoughts on that. So that was extremely useful, and really encouraging to know the regulator is extremely promoting of point of care.
Great. And in terms of the areas that you could see aCGT vector serving, so you're talking primarily about, one therapy, but are you also envisioning other areas of the life sciences, business as well, that this capability of being able to manufacture close to the source would be valuable?
Yeah, definitely. If you look at, I suppose, what's happening in the hospital right now, you have Zolgensma, for example, which is a transformative gene therapy, being administered in the hospital for babies who are screened. The mothers are screened, so even before the baby is born,
Mm.
that patient is lined up. That infant is lined up for gene therapy, and that's an example of gene therapy. In terms of cell therapy, when you look at CAR T, beyond that, CAR M, CAR NK, mesenchymal stem cells. So in terms of cell modalities, we've set up the facility to be able to manufacture multiple modalities. But then in terms of indications, when you go outside of cancer, where to be honest, there's a lifetime of work there, to be honest, even just to overcome that challenge, because obviously, blood cancer has been treated right now by CAR T, but the breakthrough will be solid tumor cancer, which is the other 90% of cancers. But then beyond that, in terms of rare diseases, sickle cell anemia, hemophilia, these are all starting to be studied. The studies are coming further down the clinic. And anyone who's looking to get into the clinic right now with a cell therapy, the challenge is there's not that many people manufacturing. And those who are typically in large facilities, and there's a waiting list of between 2 and 3 years. So what we're trying to do is make an agile network of hospitals that can respond where there's requirements, and be able to expand in a modular way very quickly, depending on where the company are at in their clinical program. So absolutely, Don, we would absolutely hope that we can start off with CAR T, and then we've got a TILS program for tumor infiltrating lymphocytes for solid tumor, and then to move very quickly into other modalities. So that's kind of, you've got to kind of really, master the trade on CAR T, we think, and then move beyond that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things, where, even in a lot of the process change stuff and Six Sigma work that I've done, right, you sort of refine one area and then take that and sort of see, whether or not if you can shift the process and make, replicate it and make it work in other areas as well. It makes a lot of sense. So
Exactly, yeah.
over the past few months, I've seen that you've added a lot of people. You talked about a lot of the people, kind of getting started. How big is your organization at this point in time?
We're now at just 11 people, actually. So
Yeah.
one of the advantages of point of care is we're very much focusing on the technology that's available to manufacture cell therapies, but you still need a bunch of smart people to be able to manufacture cell therapies. So we've spent a long time, the last 2 or 3 years, identifying the right technology. We've secured that technology and located it in the hospital. And now the key part of it really is, having secured the cell therapy expertise, and then the healthcare expertise and the financial expertise to be able to put it all together, essentially. And that's what we've been doing. But I suppose one thing we've probably learned more than anything in the last 6 months or so is that, the importance of digital. So digitally interconnecting our hospital network for a couple of reasons. Number one, you've got in a facility, there's just no way you can run in a hospital facility with paper. It has to be digitized. And then also to be able to make sure from a chain of custody and chain of identity perspective, you can say that patient's therapy is here and that patient's therapy is there, and never the twain shall meet. And you can only really do that digitally. And then interconnecting multiple hospitals together as a digital network platform is quite a complicated thing. So we've got some fairly smart people coming in who've done this before, and it's quite a mix of people. We've got the former chief medical officer of the Irish government who's joined. So in terms of healthcare and the knowledge of how that system works, that's important. I mentioned Garrod from a financial point of view in terms of how you secure the funding and then spend it wisely. And then Ivan from a scientific perspective, and then Dr. Adams, Sonia Adams, from a cell therapy perspective, is building up a team now with cell expertise. And what we're finding is a lot of the cell therapy people out there are used to growing cells in a flask in an open process, fully gowned up in a sterile environment. And now, what we're putting in front of these really clever people is closed system technology. So it's sterile inside the equipment, and the external environment doesn't need to be sterile, therefore. And that opens up the opportunity for GMP in a pod. So you can now have a mobile pod which can effectively be dropped into a hospital, and we can then run that facility inside the hospital and produce CAR T and other cell therapies. And actually, back in June, we drove the first pod with support from our partners in Ardmac and Germ Free. We drove the pod into the hospital, and we had 253 clinicians and nurses and doctors and investors and pharma experts come through that pod through a very exciting day. And the last person to come through that pod was someone who's become a good friend of ours, a chap called Pat Byrne, who is the second patient to receive CAR T therapy in Ireland. And touch wood, he's really doing well. And Pat came into the pod, and we described at his request how his CAR T therapy actually worked. And it was fantastic, to be quite honest. So it's become a real. There's a real personal side to what is a business, but it is at the same time, if we can maintain the business, then we can provide more patients with more therapies. So the two go hand in hand.
Yeah, and from my side, I mean, it brings up the much more personal side, right? So oftentimes, I mean, a lot of us don't get to see that sort of last step to the patient,
Yeah.
or from the patient, to us. And so yeah, it's amazing whenever you get to really bring that home as well. That here's somebody's been touched by this therapy that honestly we could potentially bring it more closely served to them as well. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, in all of this time, that's passed, right? I also wanted to ask you, what have you learned about yourself, Gary?
Yeah, I would say, setting up a business from scratch is something, is certainly not for the faint-hearted. Being surrounded by, some of the cleverest people on the planet at times can be daunting. And some of the, when you look around the corners and you get some of the kind of surprises that come your way, I suppose the biggest thing I've learned is resilience, really, especially I suppose from a financial perspective, where you don't necessarily know all of the hidden costs, and the key thing is to be conservative and make sure that you try and compensate for some of the unknowns, frankly, and be able to pivot, I suppose. So to be so resilient, to be able to pivot in the direction that, instead of just being dogged and sticking to the same kind of the same pathway, to actually see where things are changing or becoming much clearer and be able to pivot in that direction. But definitely resilience, I think. I have so much respect for so many people that I've known who've grown their businesses both successfully and unsuccessfully, in terms of outcome and the resilience that they must have had. I have a real appreciation, like a serious appreciation, I have to say, for that now, because it just takes so much steel and sort of determination to keep not just your own mindset, but those on the team around you, to keep that mindset moving forward rather than sort of thinking back. So yeah, it's been a real learning journey for me, I have to say. A kind of a living MBA, frankly. Another one, another one.
Yeah, I already lived through one. I don't want to go do another one, Gary.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, I said this last night, so I did a podcast late last night, your time anyway,
yeah.
around 5 o'clock Eastern time, and so I was interviewing a different CEO, and we were talking about kind of the journey of businesses inside of life sciences, and to me, what life science success is all about, not the podcast or anything else, but the truly life science success is all about is this ability to sort of know what you're plotting for inside of our space, but also having that ability to adapt to the environment. I mean, 2 years ago, who would have thought COVID was coming, and
Yes.
who would have thought, as well, that some of these new therapies that are coming, would be coming. And in addition to that, I mean, a business like yours, Gary, where you guys are trying to do something truly different. I mean,
Mm.
everybody. I mean, if you think about most of these large manufacturing facilities that have, large clean rooms and things like that on the inside of it, I mean, it sounds smart to me that, be able to sort of put that inside of the space that needs to be cleaned. And then, hey, you know what, we could still have, a smaller environment that way and sort of replicate things around. So,
Yeah, exactly. And all credit, I think. Like I don't mean to. I suppose I'm conscious that what we're trying to do is disrupt the current model, but at the same time, I'm very conscious that Novartis, Kite Gilead, BMS, Janssen have amazingly, patiently developed these therapies over the last number of decades, and they've done all the groundwork. So I think what we're really trying to do is complement some of that. That's that good work, which is unfortunately, the manufacturing side often is the challenge. Trying to get these therapies to patients is often the challenge, and people think about manufacturing perhaps a little bit too late. So really, what we're trying to do is complement that, and the same thing for investigational therapies, the 2,500 new cell therapies that are coming down the track, to give them a complementary option. So yeah, but yeah, it does feel sometimes that you're, yeah, is that so many people have said to me, this won't work. A guy in Boston I met, and he was telling me recently, a few weeks ago, no, you'll never do that. No, not in a hospital. You can never do business in a hospital. And then 10 minutes later you're talking to somebody, it's the only way to do it. So it's one of those things where it's just so nascent,
yeah.
and you've got to start, which is what I learned from my coach is a guy called Stephen Brown, and Stephen and I hung out in Edinburgh for years, and Stephen taught me one thing: start, get started. And that's what we did back in January 17th at 9 a.m. We started. So that's how you get going, I think, and that's one thing I learned about myself a long time with Stephen's help. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just
And
think
having
about
good people.
I think about the people that I've interviewed here. So, I mean, the things that are running through my mind, right? So, Joe Bagan is here in Colorado. They actually have pharmaceuticals, large scale pharmaceuticals that they bring in to sort of divide them up, is my mental way of thinking about it, to divide them up into smaller portions to be delivered to local hospitals, right? So, his business, more or less, is a clean room, pharmaceutical, all those sort of things, but also able to sort of divide things up and repackage, things much more closely for our local hospitals. So to me, that model is there, right? It sounds to
Yeah.
me like the model of having, close, manufacturing that can support the hospital is there. It's just nobody's I haven't heard, of other cases of this where people are deploying this inside of the hospital. And then also, Deborah Barton, as well as Raphael Agner. Raphael Agner has an NK therapy that he's working on. It's very early
Yes.
stage for him, but then, Deborah Barton was working on a CAR T cell therapy. So, I mean, many of the guests that have kind of come through here, I could
Hmm.
feel like, the conversation kind of touches all of them as well. So, yeah, I
I
mean,
think it
it
will. I
seems to
hope
me
so.
like
Yeah.
it'd work well. Yeah.
And I hope the community is so. One thing that has struck me, Don, is so I said I was in Boston, for example. There, it's such a small community. I was in Boston at a CAR T conference, and like tiny community. And I was recently in Frankfurt at CPHI, which is where I came from, small and large molecules, and you've got like 10 halls worth of people, as opposed to one hall of CAR T therapy people. So it just kind of struck me, it's such a small community, and we can all help each other.
Yeah.
So that's probably the challenge there. Thankfully, I suppose, and I've told myself, there are other people now starting to do what we're talking about doing, and some of them were doing it before us, and now they're starting and they're doing it. So I think that's a good thing rather than a bad thing. It's complementary to what we're trying to do, and the more people do it, the more patients will get these therapies. So I would hope that would, be the case, rather than be the kind of competitive trying to do each other out of business.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you've already answered these before, but I want to bring us back to the three questions again. Gary, what
Yeah.
inspires you?
Well, for sure, it's about really, seeing the best in people. And, I'm now in a brand new community of people. So seeing the best in people do things that I never would have really understood before. And I'm learning and they're learning from me. And I just get such a buzz out of that, I have to say. So I think it's really about the people aspect of it, and seeing people really come from perhaps partially knowing an area to really becoming an expert in that area. That just gives me such and personally learning as well. Putting in your 10,000 hours, that's just something I'm doing right now, and I just get such a buzz out of that as well.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for sharing that. And then what concerns you?
I think I touched on it there in terms of the collaboration piece. Unfortunately, I suppose we are by nature competitive. Business needs to be competitive, but we are in such a difficult, personalized space where every therapy is unique to every individual. And it's going to take a whole bunch of people, to really come together. So, what we're trying to do in aCGT Vector is to bring together the components, the digital, the technology, the GMP manufacturing and licensing footprint, the hospital clinician expertise, the doctors, the consultants that understand the diseases, and bring all of that together in the right space so we can do that. So it's going to take a lot of collaboration. People don't naturally fall into that kind of mode all the time, and that's kind of bringing different silos together is really what we would hope to try and do.
Very good. And then what excites you?
I think the opportunity to get someone to come and really back multiple hospital centers around the world, that's gonna I think that's what really keeps us going, keeps us driving forward. We can't do this on our own. It's going to take a significant backer for us to commercially move forward into a really exciting space. So that's what we're striving for. We're proving the concept in one facility, and then we can essentially then move out and move into the more centers, the more the backing we have, the more centers we can move into more quickly. So that's really what keeps us driven. Yeah, prove the concept and then move quickly.
Well, hopefully, this episode of the podcast also will help you get the word out. I mean, in my
Thank you. Yeah.
mind, right? I think about these big cancer centers that are built, across the U.S. I mean, if anything, they should be considering, how do they engage with you and have conversations with you about, about doing something similar, in these, because I mean, they use these therapies all the time, and oftentimes they're in large metropolitan cities that maybe you don't have to put it next to every hospital, but next to one
Yeah.
hospital, and then convey the therapies
Exactly.
to the other hospitals that are local to you. just using some quick brainstorming here as we're talking, but that's sort of where my mind goes is, how much closer can other, organizations put this, to their facility as well.
That's right, yeah. And I suppose the hard part is having the showing the regulator that we can do this in a safe and effective way, and then showing the reimbursement authorities that this works. This therapy actually does work. In some cases, curative. So they're the two big challenges I think that the whole industry faces. But I think we're winning the argument with CAR T because it's really transformational. There's a big case there for earlier treatment because patients could respond even better if they got their therapy earlier. So I completely agree with you.
Absolutely. So, Gary McAuslan, thank you so much for joining me on the Life Science Success Podcast. I really appreciate you being here. And for anybody that's watching on Thanksgiving, I appreciate you as well for watching us, go through the interview. And, hope everybody has a great holiday with their families as well. And, just wanted to thank you again, Gary.
Yeah, listen, thanks, Don. Yeah, and a happy Thanksgiving to everyone again. Please, please reach out and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much.